Enchanters, the time has come to be alive in the circle of Magi, where we will thrive with our brothers. Enchanters remind the time will not unwind. The dragon's crooked spine will never straighten into line. What we plead will be a faithful decree, where a man will not retreat from the defeat of his fathers. Enchanters, a time has come for better lands. We will cut this knotted ties, and some may live and some may die. Enchanter, come to me. Enchanter, come to me. Enchanter, come to sing. Can you come to sing? As you once were blind in the light, now you can see. In our strength we can rely, and history will not repeat. Enchanter, come to me. Enchanter, come
All right, I'm continuing now with my reading of Roger Zelazny's The Chronicles of Amber. We're on Book 1, 9 Princes in Amber, in Chapter 9. But before I start reading, I just wanted to really quickly show you all something. If you are a fan of fantasy or Dungeons and Dragons, and you must be a fan of fantasy since you clicked on this video, I've written 2 fantasy novels, Book 1 and Book 2, and they are narrated on my channel. I invite you to listen to them. It's very easy. You just click on my channel and go to playlist, and there's the first book right there, Forestera's Fate. And I wanted to show you this, and I wanted to show you Book 2 for a specific reason, namely the chapter right here. Book 2, Chapter 8 is called Corwin the Paladin of Amber. And then if we go down here, it says Chapter 22, Prince of Amber in Sheila's Court. So that is just kind of a teaser. And as you can see, I'm doing more Amber here as well. So Roger Zelazny was one of the dedications in my book for his great influence he had on me. I do consider this my favorite fantasy series, which is why I'm reading it, both because it's my favorite and because of my connection with my novel. So I invite you to listen to it and let me know what you think of it. Just start with Book 1 in the introductory video and tell me what you think. You might love what I did with Book 2. You might hate it. I don't really know, but I'm willing to listen. So, all right, I'm going to start up this background music, and then we'll start reading. 2 chapters to go of this crazy Book 1. All right, Chapter 9. I shall not bore you with repetition. My second year was pretty much like my first, with the same finale. Ditto for the third. Rain came twice that second year, with a basket of goodies and a mouthful of gossip. Both times I forbade him ever to come again. The third year he came down 6 times, every other month, and each time I forbade him anew and ate his food and heard what he had to say. Something was wrong in Amber. Strange things walked through shadow and presented themselves with violence to all and sundry. They were destroyed, of course. Eric was still trying to figure out how they had occurred. I did not mention my curse, though I later rejoiced in the fact that it had come to pass. Random, like myself, was still a prisoner. His wife had joined him. The positions of my other brothers and sisters remained unchanged. This bolstered me through the 3rd anniversary of the coronation, and it made me feel almost alive again. One day it was there, and it made me feel so good that I immediately broke out the final bottle of wine Rain had brought me and opened the last pack of cigarettes, which I had been saving. I smoked them and sipped and enjoyed the feeling that I had somehow beaten Eric. If he found this out, I felt it might be fatal, but I knew he didn't know. Let me see if I can turn on this light without affecting the screen. That's a minor glare, no big deal. All right, but I knew he didn't know. So I rejoiced, smoking, drinking, and reveling in the light of that which had occurred. Yes, the light. I discovered a tiny patch of brightness off somewhere to my right. Well, let's take it like this. I had awakened in a hospital bed, and learned that I had recovered all too soon. Dig? I heal faster than others who had been broken. All the lords and ladies of Amber have something of this capacity. I'd lived through the plague. I'd lived through the march on Moscow. I regenerate faster and better than anybody I've ever known. Napoleon had once made a remark about it. So had General MacArthur. With nerve tissue, it takes me a bit longer, that's all. My sight was returning to me. That's what it meant. That lovely patch of brightness off somewhere to my right. After a time, I knew that it was the little barren area in the door to my cell. I had grown new eyes, my fingers told me. It had taken me over 3 years, but I had done it. It was the 1,000,001 thing I spoke of earlier, the thing which even Eric could not properly assess because of the variances of powers among the individual members of the family. I had beaten him to this extent. I had learned that I could grow new eyeballs. I had always known that I could regenerate nerve tissues, given sufficient time. I had been left paraplegic from a spine injury received during the Franco-Prussian Wars. Hope I pronounced that right. After 2 years, it had gone away. I had had my hope, a wild one, I'll admit, that I could do what I had done then with my burned-out orbs, and I had been right. They felt intact, and the sight was returning, slowly. How long till the next anniversary of Eric's coronation? I stopped pacing and my heart beat faster. As soon as someone saw that I'd recovered my eyes, I'd lose them again. Therefore, I'd have to escape before the 4 years had passed. How? I hadn't thought about it much up to this time, because even if I could figure a way to get out of my cell, I'd never make it out of Amber, or out of the palace for that matter, without eyes or aid, and neither were available to me. Now, though, the door of my cell was a big, heavy, brass-bound thing with only a tiny grill at a height of about 5 feet for purposes of looking in to see whether I was still alive, if anyone cared. Even if I succeeded in removing it, I could tell that I couldn't reach out far enough to touch the lock. There was a little swinging gate at the bottom of the door, large enough to push my food through, and that's about all. The hinges were either on the outside or in between the door and the jamb. I couldn't tell for sure. Either way, I couldn't get at them. There were no windows and no other doors. It was still almost like being blind, save for that feeble, reassuring light through the grill. I knew my sight hadn't returned fully. That was still a long ways off. But even if it had, it was nearly pitch dark in there. I knew this because I knew the dungeons under Amber. I lit a cigarette, paced some more, and assessed my possessions, seeking anything that might be of aid. There was my clothing, my sleeping mat, and all the damp straw I wanted. I also had matches, but I quickly rejected the notion of setting fire to the straw. I doubted anyone would come and open the door if I did. Most likely the guard would come and laugh if he came at all. I had a spoon I'd picked up at the last banquet. I'd wanted a knife, really, but Julian had caught me trying to lift one and snatched it away. What he didn't know, though, was that that was my second attempt. I already had the spoon tucked inside my boot. So what good was it? I'd heard these stories of guys digging their way out of cells with the damnedest things, belt buckles, which I didn't have, etc. But I didn't have time to try the Count of Monte Cristo bit. I needed out in a matter of months, or my new eyes wouldn't mean anything. The door was mainly wood, oak. It was bound with 4 metal strips. One went around it near the top, one near the bottom, right above the gate, and there were 2 which ran from top to bottom, passing along either side of the foot-wide grill. The door opened outward, I knew, and the lock was to my left. My memories told me the door was about 2 inches thick, and I recalled the approximate position of the lock, which I verified by leaning against the door and feeling the tension at that point. I knew that the door was also barred, but I could worry about that later. I might be able to raise it by sliding the handle of the spoon upward between the door's edge and the jamb. I knelt on my sleeping mat, and with the spoon I traced a box about that area which contained the lock. I worked until my hand was quite sore, maybe a couple of hours. Then I ran my fingernail over the surface of the wood. I hadn't scarred it much, but it was a beginning. I switched the spoon to my left hand and continued until I began to ache. I kept hoping that Rain would show up. I was sure I could talk him into giving me his dagger if I really pressed the matter. He didn't put in an appearance, though, so I just kept grinding away. Day after day I worked, until I was perhaps half an inch into the wood. Each time I'd hear a guard's footsteps, I'd move the pallet back to the far wall and lie down on it with my back to the door. When he passed, I'd resumed work. Then I had to stop for a while, as much as I hated to. Even though I had wrapped them in cloth torn from my garments, my hands had blistered and the blisters had broken. And after a time, the raw flesh underneath began to bleed. So I took a break to let them heal. I decided to devote the time to planning what I'd do after I got out. When I'd worked my way far enough through the door, I'd raise the bar. The sound of it falling would probably bring a guard. By then, though, I'd be out. A couple of good kicks would break out the piece I was working on, and the lock could stay right where it was if it wanted to. The door would swing open then, and I would face the guard. He would be armed, and I wouldn't. I'd have to take him. He might be overconfident, thinking I couldn't see. On the other hand, he might be a bit afraid if he recalled how I had entered into Amber. Either way, he would die, and I would then be armed. I gripped my right biceps with my left hand, and my fingertips touched. Gods, I was emaciated. Whatever, I was of the blood of Amber, and I felt that even in that condition, I could take any ordinary man. Maybe I was kidding myself, but I'd have to try it. Then if I succeeded with a blade in my hand, nothing could keep me from reaching the pattern. I'd walk it, and when I made it to the center, I could transport myself to any shadow world I chose. There I would recuperate, and this time I would not rush things. If it took me a century, I'd have everything letter perfect before I moved against Amber again. After all, I was technically its liege. Hadn't I crowned myself in the presence of all before Eric? Before Eric had done the same, I'd make good my claim to the throne. If only it weren't impossible to walk into shadow from Amber itself. Then I wouldn't have to fool around with the pattern. But my Amber is the center of all, and you just don't depart it that easily. After, say, a month, my hands had healed, and I was developing large calluses from my scraping activities. I heard a guard's footsteps and removed myself to the far side of the cell. There was a brief creak, and my meal was slipped beneath the door. Then there were footsteps again, this time diminishing in the distance. I returned to the door. Without looking, I knew what was on the tray: a chunk of stale bread, a crock of water, and a piece of cheese if I was lucky. I positioned the mat, knelt on it, and felt at the groove. I was about halfway through. Then I heard the chuckle. It came from behind me. I turned, not needing my eyes to tell me that someone else was present. There was a man standing near the left wall, giggling. "Who is it?" I asked, and my voice sounded strange. I realized then that these were the first words I had spoken in a long while. "Escape," he said. "Trying to escape." And he chuckled again. "How did you get in here?" "Locked," he replied. "From where? How?" I struck a match, and it hurt my eyes, but I held it. He was a small man. Tiny might even be a better word. He was around 5 feet tall and a hunchback. His hair and beard were as heavy as my own. The only distinguishing features in that great mass of fur were his long hook nose and his almost black eyes, now squinted against the light. "Dworkin," I said. He chuckled again. "That's my name. What's yours?" "Don't you know me, Dworkin?" I struck another match and held it near my face. "Look hard. Forget the beard and the hair. Add 100 pounds to my frame. You drew me in exquisite detail on several packs of playing cards." "Corwin," he said at last. "I remember you, yes." "I had thought you were dead." "I'm not, though. See?" And he pirouetted before me. "How is your father? Have you seen him recently? Did he put you here?" "Oberon is no more," I replied. "My brother Eric reigns in Amber, and I am his prisoner." "Then I have seniority," he told me, "for I am Oberon's prisoner." Oh? None of us knew that Dad had locked you up. I heard him weeping. Yes, he said, after a time. He didn't trust me. Why not? I told him I'd thought of a way to destroy Amber. I described it to him, and he locked me in. That wasn't very nice, I said. I know, he agreed, but he did give me a pretty apartment and lots of things to do research with. Only he stopped coming to visit me after a time. He used to bring men who showed me splotches of ink and made me tell stories about them. That was fun, until I told a story I didn't like and turned the man into a frog. The king was angry when I wouldn't turn him back, and it's been so long since I've seen anybody that I'd even turn him back now, if he still wanted me to. Once, how did you get here? Into my cell, I asked again. I told you. I walked. Through the wall? Of course not. Through the shadow wall. No man can walk through shadows in Amber. There are no shadows in Amber. Well, I cheated, he admitted. How? I designed a new trump and stepped through it to see what was on this side of the wall. Oh my, I just remembered. I can't get back without it. I'll have to make another. Have you got anything to eat and something to draw with and something to draw on? Have a piece of bread, I said, and handed it to him, and here's a piece of cheese to go along with it. Thank you, Corwin. And he wolfed them down and drank all my water afterward. Now, if you'll give me a pen and a piece of parchment, I'll be returning to my own rooms. I want to finish a book I was reading. It's been nice talking to you. Too bad about Eric. I'll stop back again sometime and we'll talk some more. If you see your father, please tell him not to be angry with me because I don't have a pen or parchment, I observed. Goodness, he said. That's hardly civilized. I know. But then, Eric isn't very. Well, what have you got? I prefer my own apartment to this place. At least it's better lighted. You have dined with me, I said. And now I am going to ask you a favor. If you will grant me this request, I promise that I will do everything I can to make things right between you and Dad. What is it that you want? He asked. Long have I admired your work, I said, and there is something I have always desired as a work of your hand. Do you recall the lighthouse of Cabra? Of course. I've been there many times. I know the keeper, Joppin. I used to play chess with him. More than anything else I can think of, I told him, for most of my adult life, I have longed to see one of your magical sketches of that great gray tower. A very simple subject, he said, and rather an appealing one at that. I did some preliminary sketches in the past, but I never got beyond that point. Other work kept getting in the way. I'll fetch you one, if you'd like. No, I said. I'd like something more enduring, to keep me company here in my cell, to comfort me, and any others who may later occupy this place. Commendable, he said. What have you in mind as the medium? As my cats start fighting each other. I have a stylus here, I told him. The spoon was fairly sharp by then, and I'd like to see it traced upon the far wall so that I might look at it as I take my rest. He was silent a moment, then, the illumination is quite poor, he remarked. I have several books of matches, I replied. I'll light them and hold them for you. We might even burn some of the straw if we run low. Those are hardly ideal working conditions. I know, I said, and I apologize for them, great Dworkin, but they are the best I have to offer. A work of art by your hand would brighten my humble existence beyond measure. He chuckled again. Very well, but you must promise me that you will provide light afterwards, so that I may sketch myself a way back to my own chambers. Agreed, I said, and I felt in my pocket. I had 3 full packages of matches and in part of a 4th. I pressed the spoon into his hand and led him to the wall. Do you have the feel of the instrument? I asked him. Yes, it's a sharpened spoon, isn't it? Yes, I'll make a light as soon as you say you are ready. You'll have to sketch rapidly because my supply of matches is limited. I'll allot half for the lighthouse and the other half for your own business. All right, he said, and I struck a match, and he began to trace lines upon the moist gray wall. First he did an upright rectangle to frame and contain the thing. Then, with several deft strokes, the lighthouse began to appear. It was amazing. Daft as he was, his skill was intact. I held each match at its barest base, spat on my left thumb and forefinger, and when I could hold it no longer in my right, I took hold of the blackened end and inverted it, letting the match burn away completely before I struck another. When the first book of matches was gone, he had finished the tower and was working on the sea and the sky. I encouraged him. I murmured appreciation at every stroke. Great, really great, I said, when it appeared to be almost finished. Then he made me waste another match while he signed it. I was almost through the second book by then. Now let's admire it, he said. If you want to get back to your own apartments, you'll have to leave the admiring to me, I told him. We're too low on matches to be art critics at this point. He pouted a bit, but moved to the other wall and began sketching as soon as I struck a light. He sketched a tiny study, a skull on the desk, a globe beside it, walls full of books all around. Now that's good, he said, when I had finished the third pack and was starting on the remaining partial pack. It took him 6 more to finish up and 1 to sign it. He gazed at it while the 8th match burned. There were only 2 remaining. Then he took a step forward and was gone. The match was burning on my fingertips by then, and I dropped it, and it sizzled when it hit the straw and went out. I stood there shaking, full of mixed feelings, and then I heard his voice and felt his presence at my side. He was back again. I just thought of something, he said. How can you see the picture when it's so dark in here? Oh, I can see in the dark, I told him. I've lived with it so long that it has become my friend. I see. I just wondered. Give me a light so I can go back now. Very well, I agreed, considering my second-to-last match. But you'd better bring your own illumination next time you stop around. I'll be out of matches after this. All right. And I struck a light, and he considered his drawing, walked toward it, and vanished once more. I turned quickly and considered the lighthouse of Cabra before the match failed. Yes, the power was there. I could feel it. Would my final match serve me, though? No, I didn't think it would. A longer period of concentration than that was required for me to use a trump as a gateway. What could I burn? The straw was too damp and might not take fire. It would be horrible to have the gateway, my road to freedom, right there with me and not be able to use it. I needed a flame that would last a while. My sleeping roll. It was a cloth liner stuffed with straw. That straw would be drier, and the cloth would burn, too. I cleared half the floor down to the bare stone. Then I sought the sharpened spoon to use to cut the liner. I cursed then. Dworkin had carried it off with him. I twisted and tore at the thing. Finally, it came open, and I pulled out the dry straw from the middle. I made a little heap of it, and I set the liner nearby to use as extra fuel if I needed it. The less smoke, the better, though. It would attract attention if a guard passed this way. This wasn't too likely, though, since I had just recently been fed, and I got 1 meal a day. I struck my last match, then used it to set fire to the cardboard book that had continued it. When this got going, I used it on the straw. It almost didn't take. The straw was damper than I'd thought, even though it came from the center of my mat. But finally there was a glow, and then a flame. It took 2 of the other empty matchbooks to achieve this, so I was glad I hadn't thrown them down the john. I tossed on the third, held the liner in my left hand, and stood and faced the drawing. The glow spread up the wall as the flames danced higher, and I concentrated on the tower and recalled it. I thought I heard the cry of a gull. I sniffed something like a salt breeze, and the place became more real as I stared. I tossed the liner onto the fire, and the flames subsided for a moment, then sprang higher. I didn't remove my eyes from the drawing as I did this. The magic was still there in Dworkin's hand, for soon the lighthouse seemed as real to me as my cell. Then it seemed the only reality, and the cell but a shadow at my back. I heard the splashing of the waves and felt something like the afternoon sun upon me. I stepped forward, but my foot did not descend into the fire. I stood upon the sandy, rock-strewn edge of the small island Cabra, which held the great gray lighthouse that lit a path for the ships of Amber by night. A flock of frightened gulls wheeled and screamed about me. and my laughter was one with the booming of the surf and the free song of the wind. Amber lay 43 miles behind my left shoulder. I had escaped. That's the end of chapter 9. I hope you're enjoying it. Like I said, I'd love to chat with you guys about Amber as well as my book in the comments. You can chat with me in the comments here about my book or in the comments there. Either one's fine. I'll be back again for the last chapter of this book soon enough. Let me turn this down and exit out of here. Hold on one second.
As you once were blind in the light, now you can sing. In our strength we can rely, and history will not repeat. Ancient as the time has come to be alive in the circle of Magi, where we will thrive with our brothers. Ancient as remind, the time will not unwind. The dragon's crooked spine